Can we just talk?
Metro FM Talk with Faith Mangope.
Monday to Thursday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m.
It is 30 minutes after 7 o'clock on this Monday evening. Well, let's begin the conversation, especially regarding the multi-charter for South Africa. During a meeting that happened on Thursday night, it was brought to the attention of ActionSA that the referendum party, which is associated with the Cape Independence Movement, has applied to join the multi-party charter of South Africa. Now, ActionSA has maintained that they can't associate themselves with the independence movement as the independence idea is offensive and based on segregation. Well, ActionSA's national chairperson, Michael Beaumont, joins us in the studio this evening. We're also going to be getting some response from Cape Independence co-founder Philip Craig. But Michael, let me start off with you. A very good evening and welcome to Metro FM Talk. I think it's the first time that we're actually talking with each other here live in the studio.
And it's so much better to be in the studio than over the phone.
Right, it is so much better. Let's talk a little bit about this. I mean, especially when it comes to being brought to the obviously it was brought into the attention of the multi-party charter. Just first of all, take us through how many political parties are now part of this multi-party charter, and this conversation regarding the possibility of the referendum party joining this the organization or the charter of South Africa. How did it come about?
Well, there's 11 political parties in the multi-party charter, and when it was inaugurated in August last year, it was determined that it would operate by consensus. So when a new political party wants to join the charter, there must be a discussion and there must be consensus to pursue that discussion. We received communication from the referendum party in the run-up to a meeting on Thursday last week. It was a standard regular meeting of the charter, and it was an application to join the charter. And ActionSA made it very clear to its partners that we would under no circumstances contribute towards a consensus on any discussion as it relates to the referendum party, and categorically stated that, we would rather leave the charter, quite frankly, than to be associated with the referendum party and its associated Cape Independence Movement. So we advised our partners that no discussion would be necessary in that regard, because no consensus could possibly exist from our point of view. And I think, Faith, to put this into context, we've got to understand that what the Cape Independence Movement stands for and this referendum party is offensive to our constitution. It is offensive to our cause as a multi-party charter. When we came together to unite South Africans so we can deliver change, not to divide off a province and hive it off and give it to a bunch of people to go and run.
But somehow they feel as though they've got the leverage, at least, or whatever backing that would even lead them to the point of application. Right. So whatever it is or whoever it is that is backing these guys are people who are, number one, intentional. Because we had this conversation. I had Philip here in the conversation. I said to him, and he said to me, no, we did a sample size of about, and 70% of people in the Western Cape are for this, the Cape Independence. And I asked him, then how big was your sample size? How many people did you actually survey? And he said 1,000. And I said, you can't base it. Even a sample size is too small anyways to base it and significant. I mean, sample size has to be at least 10% of 20% to give you a true reflection of what the actual outcomes are. And more than anything else, the variety of outcomes that could possibly exist. So I had a conversation, but it seems, Michael, that this is not going away. These are not guys that are just sitting in the corner cafe or in the pub somewhere discussing the fate of South Africa. These are guys that are potentially funded by somebody or somebodies that have got an vested interest in seeing South Africa divided and the Western Cape belonging to somebody. And the question is, the Western Cape belonging to who?
Well, I don't know. And I suppose this is the question that they're going to have to answer. But ultimately, from our point of view, I think what's really sad here is that these guys are preying on a frustrated voter base. Across South Africa, you've got people, including in the Western Cape, who are fed up with ANC governance. They want to see change. And they've had an opposition parties in South Africa that appear to want to be in opposition in perpetuity. And they don't see the possibility for change under that environment. And that's what this referendum party and the Cape Independence Movement is preying on, the vulnerabilities of those South Africans. But the reality is, from our point of view, we are unambiguous to say they cannot join the multi-party charter, for one, because we are very clear about the fact that we have a sovereign South Africa with 9 provinces protected in our constitution. We think that the polling that they have put forward is highly dubious. And I think we must be clear about this. All over South African politics, we see polls being produced by interest groups that come out with findings in favor of their particular interest group. And it's very easy to manipulate the outcome of a poll, and we don't take that with anything less than a bag of salt. And from our point of view, I think it's time that as South Africans, we stand up and reject this kind of segregationist type of movement that's trying to divide us at a time where we need to be coming together so that we can advance our country. And ultimately, yes, organizations like this can exist and express their free speech in terms of our constitution, but it doesn't mean we should like it or support it.
11 political parties are part of the multi-charter of South Africa, multi-party charter of South Africa. How many of them are for the idea of the joining of this referendum party, and who in that 11? Because you guys talk. The only way that you're able to be in consistent agreement is if you guys talk. So who in that 11 is actually thinking, this is a good idea to have Cape Independence join us?
I don't think anyone, quite frankly, but then I must be clear about this. When ActionSA spoke up, we were the first to raise our hands, and we said, because we operate by consensus, we have a duty to inform our partners that you will be wasting your time if you want to embark upon a discussion with the referendum party, because we are required for consensus and we will not give it for them to join.
But who was open for discussion? Who was open for that conversation to even happen or to be even presented?
I genuinely don't think we even got that far. And I'm not trying to be evasive here or anything of that nature. I'm merely trying to observe that the moment the discussion came up, ActionSA was the first to put up our hands and say, we will not be a part of this. You know, if there's no consensus, we cannot go any further. And at that point in time, the conversation ended.
We're going to be taking in your calls and voice notes as well. Give us a call. It seems as though as much as we can have a conversation about how we will never have a segregated or perhaps an independent Cape, there is something that is driving, or a force behind that is driving even the idea of an independent, and I say independent in inverted commas because clearly, what are we saying here about independence, but an independent Western Cape? Just a bunch of guys having conversations at the bar? Or is it really fueled by people that have got genuine interest with genuine money? And is it possible? Let's have a conversation after the break. It's 24 minutes after 7 o'clock, of course. Let's continue this conversation. We're taking a look at ActionSA's stance on even the proposal, or would be or the attempt to propose for the referendum party to be put on the table or to be part of the multi-party charter. And again, Michael, you and I were even having a conversation about this, that it's not just about whether or not they're able to gather momentum. It's about whether or not they can infiltrate a significant number of people that already feel disenfranchised by the current status quo. And that in itself becomes dangerous.
Yeah, without any question. I mean, we live in a country where people are desperate. We have 41% unemployment. We have 83 people being murdered a day, continuous load shedding. South Africans are desperate for solutions. And there's no question that we live in a fragile democratic environment where things can be set off very easily, where tensions between races still remain very real because the lines of inequality continue to mirror our racially unjust past. And when you have people coming out making these very irresponsible ideas and effectively proposing forms of segregation in a province like the Western Cape, it is irresponsible and it creates a huge powder cake situation in South Africa, which is entirely avoidable. The answer has to be through democratic change. If you don't like your government, we must go out there and convince a majority of people to change their government. Otherwise, it starts to get a bit silly. What happens if, the city of Tshwane is governed by the multi-party charter group of parties now? Should we secede from Gauteng province? I happen to have a DA ward councillor who's very lazy and I have to do a lot of work for the community. Should I secede from the city of Johannesburg? No, I think we can all agree the answer has to be in bringing a majority of people with you to bring change into your country, and seceding from the Republic is just, quite frankly, intellectually lazy.
Would you say that the Cape Independence is a racist political movement?
I think it's racially segregationist. I think that is the biggest concern from what we're seeing, because ultimately when they claim that the Western Cape is distinct politically from the rest of the other 8 provinces, really what they are saying is that the Western Cape is the only province in South Africa in which national minority groups like white and coloured voters are actually a majority in the Western Cape. Effectively, that is the racial patterns that have governed South African political trends for a long time. It's starting to change as parties like ActionSA come on board and win votes from all communities. But effectively, that is the concern. And really, when you hear the language of the referendum party, they don't want people coming from the Eastern Cape into their province. And if they do, it seems like they would far more celebrate if they looked like me more than you. And we find that kind of language also very concerning, because really it's like sinister behind the scenes level of motive behind what's going on. And we cannot have a situation where South Africans' movement is being threatened from one province to another on the basis of the color of their skin or any other form of discrimination.
Well, as we do on the show, we've also welcomed Philip Craig to come in and give a response to this. Philip, a very good evening to you, and thank you so much once again for always being able to be available and answer some of these questions. I know that you made, obviously, the application to be part of the multi-party charter. ActionSA has taken a very resolute stance regarding the thought of you joining. But let's just talk a little bit about this. And as you've heard from Michael saying that, you guys are seen as a racially segregatorist organization. How then do you respond to that? How do you reconcile that? Because that becomes quite significant, especially if you're trying to get people to back your movement in any shape or form.
Yeah, look, thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Michael. Good to have the discussion. Look, unfortunately, we have to realise that part of living in South Africa, getting called racist is fairly commonplace, and we have to sort of focus on what's behind that, and we certainly mustn't get distracted by name calling. Michael talked about how it's important that we pursue democratic change, and we agree 100%. It's absolutely crucial that we pursue democratic and peaceful change. But we can't then brush things under the carpet, and we have to recognise some of the functional and the real realities of South Africa. South Africa is an entity that is 114 years old. Throughout its entire history, somebody is dominated from the centre, and somebody has been subjugated or lost. It's a system that just doesn't work. It's never worked. And when we look at the Western Cape, we have to remember that for 30 years, the majority of people in the Western Cape have never been governed by the party that they voted for, and they have no reasonable prospect of ever being governed by the party they vote for. So they don't have democracy, and fortunately, both our constitution and international law makes provision for exactly this situation. If you have a group of people who simply cannot vote out the government that they don't like and cannot vote in the government that they do want, then actually there's provisions made for them, and that is the right of self-determination, the right of people to be able to take control of their own destiny, democratic. It's nothing to do with race, it's got nothing to do with segregation, it's got to do with a group of people, 7 million people in the Western Cape, who simply are not governed according to their democratic will. And if we have Cape independence, we grant those people the right to have meaningful democracy and to meaningfully improve their lives. And ultimately, how do we want to do that? We want to do that in accordance with the Constitution by calling the referendum that the Constitution allows and allowing all people in the Western Cape, regardless of their race, religion and culture, to have a vote and to accept then the outcome of that. And allow the Western Cape people to decide for themselves whether they see a better future as part of South Africa or whether they see a better future going alone. And that is democracy.
Well, it's just so odd to know where to even begin here. I think, firstly, the idea of likening the Western Cape to countries in Eastern Europe that have had to secede from the Soviet Union is just such a bizarre example. And to try and draw any level of applicability here is just... It's an abuse of history, quite frankly. But also, it's false to say that the people of the Western Cape don't get the government they voted for. We have a 3-tier system of government in South Africa. You have a system where you vote for your ward councillor and your party at a municipal level. At a second level, you vote for your provincial government. And very clearly, people in the Western Cape have voted in favour in a majority of being governed by the DA at a local level and at a provincial level. So Phil's idea that they don't get a say is entirely without merit. What Phil's beef is about national government. And Phil wants to have a situation where, a minority can determine how the majority, votes in terms of an election. And that's not how it's done in a democratic system. Phil talks about democracy, but effectively he doesn't like the idea of a majority. Where we live in a democratic system where if you don't like things, you have the right to form a political party, you have a right to go out there and campaign, and you have a right to go out there and win the votes of South Africans to achieve the majority that will be necessary in the South African political context at a national level. Now, Phil talks about the idea that this will never happen in South Africa, which, I think is very pessimistic kind of doomsday kind of philosophy, but that's his right. And I suppose that's his salesmanship. That's what he's selling. What I'm selling is a dynamic where the ANC is going to fall below 50% in this election. That is appreciated across the board, irrespective of who you speak to. The only debate is how far below 50 they're going to fall. So in the very election where the ANC is going to lose the grip on majority that it has had ever since 1994, Phil is saying there's no chance for change in South Africa. It doesn't make sense. And that is why we as a political party have gone out. We've gone and campaigned on the ground and formed structures in all 9 provinces. We formed part of a multi-party charter that now represents the biggest voting bloc in history outside of the ANC. And that is the rational response to democratic campaigning for change, not what Phil is proposing.
Phil, what would happen though if you, right now as it is, there seems to be a clear block towards you even being part of the multi-party charter of South Africa. What's the next move? Unless, of course, there are political parties that you have spoken to who are open to even the idea of you joining that multi-party, in which case it would be very interesting to know which parties actually support this, which parties are in alliance with you. Because clearly for you to even have that application, there must be some kind of indication that you've got parties, political parties that may side with you and in your views and in your principles. So which political parties actually are siding with you, or at least are in alliance with what you guys believe in?
Well, look, so I think to a certain extent we've kind of lost track. Let me just come back to a couple of things that Michael said if I can. First of all, I think he's taking an extraordinary selective view of democracy, an extraordinary selective view of the law, and I'm just going to, all people have the right to self-determination. That is a just Kogan's right, which all people are entitled to. The Western Cape Constitution, which has been certified by the South African Constitutional Court, starts off with we, the people of the Western Cape. So the people of the Western Cape have got an absolute just Kogan's right in international law, which is verified to the South African Constitution, to make decisions for themselves. And I accept that Michael may find them unsavoury, he may not like them, he may think they're distasteful, he may think they're racist, and it doesn't matter about any of those things. That's simply his views and his party's view. He cannot use his views to negate the democratic will of the Western Cape people. Whether he likes it or not, they have got those rights, they have got the right to exercise them, and we're fighting for those legitimate rights. Because
but I would like also that particular question of mine answered. I'm not confused with my line of questioning. So which particular political parties have been open to having a conversation about allegiance or alliance with you and the principles of Cape independence? Have you been in conversations with other political parties? Which political parties share or are even open to the ideologies which you're very clear in communicating? Which parties stand with you?
Well, look, so in the last elections, in the West, so first of all, we have to recognise that our primary focus as a party is not national. Our primary focus is provincial, and we're standing primarily in the Western Cape. But because we've got supporters outside of the Western Cape, and because we've got a legislation that we want to table in the national parliament, we're also standing on the national ballot. So our primary purpose is in the Western Cape. But actually, since we're standing anywhere nationally, we made a promise when we launched our party that we would help or do our bit on a national level to try and remove the ANC. So we said that we were going to vote with the MPC. We decided off our own back to approach the MPC to formally assist them. They decided that they don't want us to. That's fine. No gripe with us. That's their right to make, and we're not fighting that decision. We will still vote with the MPC because we promised our voters that we would. But the national ballot is not our primary concern. Our primary concern is in the Western Cape, where we want to force the Western Cape Premier to call a referendum on Cape independence. Now, in the last elections in 2021, there were 3 parties in the Western Cape that had Cape independence on their in their manifestos, and that was the Cape Independence Party, the Cape Coloured Congress, and the Freedom Front Plus. And obviously, I haven't seen all of their manifestos yet for this next election. And obviously, clearly, we will certainly have. We have got our manifesto, although we've not published our manifesto just yet.
Well, I'm still not getting a clear sense of how it is that Phil's going to contribute to the project of change in South Africa, because what I'm confused about is the Cape Independence Movement through the referendum party is applying to join the multi-party charter for South Africa, not the multi-party charter for the Western Cape. There's no such thing as the multi-party charter for the Western Cape. So he wants to sign up to the multi-party charter for South Africa, whose founding principles are constitutionalism, based on a sovereign South Africa with 9 provinces, and winning the support of a majority in order to deliver change that our country needs. Those are the founding principles of the multi-party charter. I cannot understand for one moment the strategy or the thought process that goes behind the referendum party saying, we're going to sign up to this thing, even though our only agenda is the Western Cape. And given that our stated intention published on our websites and everywhere else is not to take votes from the ANC, by the way, Phil, is to take votes from other parties in the multi-party charter so that you can leverage this issue in the Western Cape provincial government. So, it's just a very confusing strategy that you're following, but, I'm not here to comment on your strategy. That's yours. And at the end of the day, you're free to follow it. But, I would regard it highly unlikely that the referendum party is going to win even remotely enough votes for a seat in any legislature or National Assembly so that any of this can actually find expression at the end of the day.
And I must say to the both of you, and I'm really being, the truth of the matter is the elections of 2024 have not been cast in stone. So you may have polls say the African National Congress is going to get 46%, or some saying the African National Congress is going to get 48 or 47%. The truth of the matter is, and here's the truth, you don't know until voting day. You don't know until those ballot papers have been counted. You do not know until the people have cast their votes, because whatever it is, these are poll results. Poll results are not votes, unfortunately. So it's not cast in stone, which means that the African National Congress can actually turn around and get 50 plus 1%, to the shock, I'm sure, of many political parties that are sitting at the opposition bench. But that is the beauty of a dynamic democracy, is that you do not know, because the true people that actually get to determine the outcomes of these elections are the voters. And with that, I've got so many voice notes. Let me take up getting signal to take voice notes. This is what you had to say.
Good evening, Faith, and good evening to your guests, and good evening to the Metro listeners. The Cape independence, it cannot happen, because the people that are interested to the Cape independent must first win the election so that they can change the constitution so that it can favor them with their mindset of Cape independence. We have a problem of the Orania that's supposed not to happen, but the people, they still advocating about the Cape independence. It cannot happen when they are still a minority. Good evening, it's Matobeya Kauleza in Ivory Park.
Good evening, Faith, and good evening to your guest. Phil's idea of cessation. Okay, wow. Look, it cannot be done. We are trying to fix South Africa here. We're not trying to divide the country further, because this is exactly what this would mean. It's further divisions that are not necessary, and so absolutely not. It cannot be. The Western Cape must just figure out how to work with the rest of the country. If you don't like what you see at national, then you do what it takes to change that. But no, we cannot. We can't. We cannot. Once we start this, we're going backwards, in essence. Nogwezi Walkerville.
Good evening, Faith, in studio, and your guest and the technical team. I hear your guest talking about democratic change, but I have a question. My question is, why is it that in this day and age, we no longer have leaders who were similar to the caliber of the late Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, Although the old man was not a saint, but what he did was to serve the people and not himself.
All right, we'll talk some more after the break.
Good evening, Faith, in studio, and your guest and the technical team. I hear your guest talking about democratic change, but I have a question. My question is, why is it that in this day and age we no longer have leaders who were were similar to the caliber of the late Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, you know. Although the old man was not a saint, but what he did was to serve the people and not himself. But when you look at politicians in this day and age, you find that they only think about their stomachs and pockets, you know. And once they are elected and in power, they are nowhere to be found. They forget about service delivery, serving the people, giving back to the community. So that's my question. Why is it that we have leaders, those who only think about themselves? I thank you. This is Ruben Pule Rapitana in Pretoria.
Good evening, Faith and all Metro FM listeners, as well as your guest today. I know most political parties are listening to this. We just need whoever wins in the next elections to rule South Africa the way the South African wants. Please, let's do away with corruption, crime, and everything that is bad in our country. This is Moses Mukwena of Hamukokwaila. Thank you.
Good evening, Faith, and good evening to the Metro FM listeners, and good evening to your guests. You remember, Faith, a few weeks ago, the DA said they wanted to invoke certain powers, constitutional powers, for them to have a referendum, so that they can, the Premier can have more powers. They're saying that these powers are sanctioned by the Constitution. And then now we get reports that the MPC or Cape Independence wants to join the MPC or whatever. And you've been asking the guy from ActionSA who was willing to listen. I think you might have an answer. The answer is just in plain sight. It could be the DA because the Western Cape is their baby. The Western Cape is their baby and they brag about it. So it could be them.
Thanks, guys. I really do appreciate it. And thank you so much for keeping on sending some of these, some of the voice notes. It's very imperative to what you have to think. If you should find out, Michael, that indeed the Democratic Alliance may align with the ideologies of, and I'm not saying they do, but they may align with the ideologies of an Cape independence so that A, they can retain, because ultimately politics is about who gets the power and who gets to retain positions of power, especially in a dynamic democracy where we've got the smaller and up and coming political parties that are also causing a threat to the status quo. Should you find that the Democratic Alliance actually aligns with Cape Independence, what then? What happens to ActionSA as well as you being part of the MPC?
Well, I mean, I think we would understand that would be a massive betrayal of the multi-party charter, because as I've indicated, we've come together and over 2 days negotiated an agreement that's been signed by the leaders of parties, including the leader of the DA. So if that were to happen, it would be a massive betrayal. And certainly, if that were to happen, we would go into opposition in the Western Cape and we would fight this issue tooth and nail at every single turn, because you cannot say that the only solution for the people of the Western Cape is to leave South Africa. It hasn't come to that. We need to use our democratic instruments of change to ensure that we can improve our country. And the notion of that happening would be inconceivable. But for what it's worth, the multi-party charter stands united. And we must put that down. We disagree on many things, but on the idea that there has to be a sovereign South Africa with 9 provinces that's uniting South Africans behind the agenda for change, that is something that we have stood together from the inception of this multi-party charter until present. And from our point of view, we believe we will remain unified in that project all the way through to the elections and beyond.
If you disagree on a lot of things, how will you agree on who gets to become the president of the country should you win 50+1?
Well, I think what's interesting is we disagree on many things that you will have seen publicly, but on the things that matter the most, we agree. And that's really what counts here. Because when we came together as a multi-party charter, we actually explored the policy overlap between our parties. And we found there was a lot of common ground on how we would grow an economy, fight crime, stop corruption, end load shedding, for example. But as you refer to that very particular question, we've done something quite unique. We've indicated that the largest party doesn't automatically get the presidency because South Africa doesn't have a presidential election system. Because a party is voted for by a particular voter doesn't mean that voter wants that leader to be the president. That's not our electoral system. So we've indicated that there will have to be a process to determine which of these leaders has the most public support. and for us to rally behind such a person. And I think as a novelty for South Africans, we've also indicated that we will not support any candidate for president or premier unless there's a lifestyle audit conducted and publicized for the South African people to see. I think going one step further, Faith, is that even when we talk about how we're going to determine ministers and MECs, we've moved away from the model of saying you get this and I get that and it's treated like a cake being carved up. But we actually move towards a sort of story now where we actually deal with it on merit. And we say, right, if we talk about policing, who's got the best candidate for Minister of Police? And if it's not my party, I say, well, at least the best person's got it. And we move on to the next subject. And these are big changes in terms of how we're going to go about choosing leadership that I think is a positive about the multi-party charter.
Do you trust your fellow multi-party charter agreement members, the 11? And I say this, and again, I go back to the very same basis of politics. Politics is dynamic. Politics is about power. Politics is about who gets to get the stake at the top of the table. Come, let's say, elections for whatever reason, and the African National Congress, let's say, gets about 47% of the votes. They need to get other coalition party members, and they're able to negotiate a deal with the Democratic Alliance. Let's say that John Steenhuisen and Cyril Ramaphosa and whoever it is, they get to have a negotiation about the Democratic Alliance coming in to the presidency, perhaps. Hypothetically speaking, the EFF joining into that trinity, holy or unholy trinity, whichever way you choose to look at it. What happens to the multi-party charter agreement? Because you guys would have gone in under the understanding that you're all going to be together and you're going to go in for the purpose of perhaps unseating the African National Congress where majority is concerned. The ANC gets that 47. They then negotiate a deal behind closed doors with John Steenhuisen and the Democratic Alliance, bring in the EFF. What happens to your multi-party charter? Don't answer me now. Let me answer me after the break. All right, it's 53 minutes after 7 o'clock. Of course, we're continuing with Michael Beaumont, who is the national chairperson of ActionSA. He is in the studio with us. We do also thank Philip Craig for joining us in the conversation so that he could respond to the multi-party charter, who've now said or rejected the application by Cape Independence to join, or the referendum party to join in the MPC. That is the multi-party charter of South Africa. You've heard it here. They have rejected it. They're going ahead, of course, with their plans of getting an independent Western Cape. Whether they get it or not, that's up to you. You, as a South African citizenship, do you want that for your country? And if the answer is you do not want that for your country, then don't entertain it. It's just that simple. But if you do want it for your country, then entertain it, because you've got the democratically elected political right to do so. That's what makes you a citizen of a democracy, is that you get to actually choose whether or not you want to be in it or not. So I do thank Philip for always availing himself for this conversation. But I always have to ask you, though, Michael, is that what would happen if the Democratic Alliance, and let's say the ANC gets 47% of the vote, and now they need the political parties that are going to be in alliance with them so that they can get that 50+1 majority. And they decide, actually, hold on a second, we can side with the Democratic Alliance because the Democratic Alliance is the devil that we know. So we can side with the policies of the Democratic Alliance. We can side with the policies of the EFF, Economic Freedom Fighters. What happens to your multi-party charter agreement? Because that would mean that there were agreements that are made in the back door that are now directly impacting on the charter that was signed in public.
Sure. So when you used the question earlier, do I trust that this won't happen? Trust is not a word that we use in politics very readily. I don't think we should work on the basis of trust, rather, but to basically analyze the situation in the following way. When we came together for the multi-party charter, we as ActionSA said we will not sign any agreement unless the parties in this charter categorically rule out that they will not work with the ANC. They've signed it. They've publicized that document. It's available for the listeners or anyone who wants to see it. And ultimately, we have to operate with a degree of faith that political parties do what they say and say what they do. We also know, however, and we are comforted by the following fact, is that any political party that signs that agreement and then gets into bed with the very ANC they've spent the last however long campaigning to remove will have basically destroyed itself. And that is why I say we trust self-interest, because any political party that goes and does that will find itself very quickly doing what ANC MPs have been doing for years, which is defending the indefensible. And when the next pala happens and there's a motion of no confidence brought, those members of parliament from whichever party sells their lot in with the ANC will find themselves raising their hands to defend the things that they've been fighting for years and years. And in that process, the South African people will bury that party, and we'll be there to help with a spade, because that's what they will deserve. You can't campaign around change and throw your lot in with the ANC. Ultimately, ActionSA is unequivocal about the fact that we will never govern with the ANC. We have a philosophy which is you cannot fix what is wrong with South Africa in partnership with what is wrong with South Africa. And we will never bend on that principle. And we believe parties need to come out and be unequivocal on that message. And if there's any equivocation about that particular question, South African voters should get very nervous in this election.
So you don't trust the Democratic Alliance?
I don't trust any political party. And I must be clear, when we formed this charter and we joined with these other parties, we didn't do it because we were friends, and we didn't do it because we trust them. So to answer your question, no. But at the end of the day, these are lesser devils. We're dealing with an ANC government that has brought this country to its knees with continuous load shedding, 41% unemployment, 83 murders a day, a woman raped every 12 minutes. At the end of the day, we need an alternative, and that alternative requires us to work with better devils, parties we may not like and may not trust, but we have to work with them in the interests of South Africa.
I've got so many more voice notes. Here are some of the voice notes that you've left us this evening.
Faith and the Metro FM listeners, my comment is just on the Cape Independence. For a person who lives in Mpumalanga would think that Cape Town is a very nice province, beautiful and everything. From the tourist side, it looks very nice. But should you visit Cape Town, there's areas in Cape Town that you'd be even ashamed that there's people living there for how they speak so highly of themselves. So all these white people who are in Cape Town talking about Cape Independence, they are just selfish people. They are the people who brought apartheid, and they are very much oppressors of people. They don't care, and they cannot say they blame ANC. They have the DA as the provincial government, and they have, like the other guy in the studio said, they have every power below national, and they are doing nothing about the poor society of Cape Town. So independence is not going to benefit anyone in Cape Town, and they must stop fooling the colored community of Cape Town saying this will benefit them. It's only for the white people, and they want to benefit themselves in their white pockets.
Good evening, Faith and the listeners. Faith, my lady, and your visitors there. Guys, these people have divided us long time ago, before even apartheid started. They've done it through apartheid. Now we have to build a company. They're coming again to divide us. I'm Cape Townian. I stay in Cape Town. I have experienced how DA is treating the black and the colored here, and the black business and the colored business, and the Uber drivers, which is the black business, the way they've been handling the people here. If we can get these people back in power, I guarantee you guys, we're going to have a model apartheid back in this country. We are going backwards, guys. We are going backwards. These people, they don't want to fix the country. They want country back where it was.
Good evening, Faith, and your distinguished guest there. This is my opinion, and I think the problem that South Africa has now is everybody who has a political party, is out to vote out the ANC, which in my opinion is all good and well. But the question that I'm asking is, what are you guys planning to do differently than the ANC? Yes, we are aware of the ANC's shenanigans and. But what are you guys planning to do differently for every South African to enjoy and fully benefit from the Freedom Charter? Let the people shall govern. Let the people enjoy the fruits that South Africa has, because we are sitting with high numbers of unemployment. That's one. Two, graduates cannot be placed. We now have a case where doctors cannot be placed. What are you guys planning to do differently? Brian from Dobsonville.
I think we can stop it there. The truth of the matter is you've got your manifesto launch on the 16th of March. So perhaps we need to invite you guys back into the studio to talk a little bit about it. And as we do with every single political party, you know it, that on this show we have every political party represented so that they can tell you for themselves about exactly why is it that you need to vote for them. I'm not going to tell you why you should vote for them. You need to ask them the questions. They need to give you the information so that you get to decide who you get to put in power. And I think that becomes quite pertinent, who you get to put in power. Michael, I always appreciate you making the time for us, but it's also very interesting to see that you're in bed with the devils that the better devils that you know, not because you trust them, but because you'd rather work with them than work with the African National Congress.
The desperation of the situation in South Africa and under which South Africans find themselves requires us to do what South Africans have to do every day, which is work with people they may not like and may not trust, but they have to for the betterment of their church, their business, their family. And we are no different in politics. We have to work with political parties we wouldn't ordinarily want to, but we need to because we've got to move South Africa forward.
ActionSA, much appreciated for your time. 2 minutes after 8 o'clock. Up next, I said this before and I say it again. If you're a student, if you've been a student, if you are a student, if you're a parent of a student, we're in conversation with the Minister of Higher Education, Science and Innovation. Bladen Zamane joins us for the conversation after this.
Can we just talk?
Metro FM Talk with Faith Mangope.
Monday to Thursday, 7 p.m. to 9 p.m.